Yes, static tests are necessary, and jet engines have those in the thousands of hours. The F1 engine did have static testing, certainly. We've seen film of it. But the only in-flight testing that the F1 engine had was in Apollo 6.
First off, we're talking about the difference between a jet engine that would cost maybe $1 million and a F1 engine which costs tens of millions of dollars each. Massive differences in money. So, and then the jet engines are much readily available than an F1 engine. So, if every time you launch an F1 engine in flight conditions, you lose the engine. So that would be a very good motivation as to not test them in flight as much as possible. So we got one test done in flight. We found the problems. We went back to the static testing, figured out the problem and how to solve it in static testing. Time to launch it in flight again. The pogo oscillations on Apollo 6 were not cause for abort, and they were not cause for concern of the astronaut safety. So testing them again, where the worst likely outcome that could happen was, again, pogo oscillations, then you just make it to low Earth orbit and you fall back down.
What do you mean make it to low Earth orbit and fall back down? What are you talking about? Getting to Earth from low Earth orbit is a major undertaking.
Yeah, and Apollo 6 accomplished that. Apollo 6 went to low Earth orbit. It orbited around the Earth.
Yes, and?
And it had pogo oscillations.
And what happened then?
So if the pogo oscillations, at worst, make it go to low Earth orbit, then the thing that you're worried about is having Apollo 8 just not make it to the moon. It just makes it to low Earth orbit, in which you just end the mission there and bring it back down. Your astronauts are still safe.
This is where we differ in our approach. I say that there were major problems with Apollo 6. You say there were minor problems with Apollo 6.
Yes, I say they're minor problems because it still accomplished every single one of its goals, and every engineer that would talk about this says it's minor problems. You say they're major problems, and I'm going to play a little armchair psychology here. It's because you want to confirm your biases.
Yeah, of course I do. Same as you're doing.
You're using other people's words.
Yeah, and I'm using other people's words too. And you believe everything that everybody tells you is 100% true.
First off, that's a massive straw man. And I think that the engineers themselves didn't have a reason to lie. Knowing how engineers work, I don't think they have a reason to lie, and I don't think they would have.
No, I would agree with you. I would say that the majority, if not everybody, working on Apollo during the 60s was doing the very best job they could. They were building the best rockets, the best engines, the best landers, the best everything, the best of everything. Mm-hmm. This was going to be seen live on television. They didn't know that what they had built worked until they saw it launched and reported back by NASA as to what happened. They didn't know if the spacesuits worked. They didn't know if the engines worked according to their specification. They hoped they would, obviously, because they designed them as best they could. Don't forget they were using slide rules. They were doing the best job they could, and they would see the result of their work on television, live on television, don't forget, as the rockets launched from Apollo 8 onwards. Oh, there she goes. Tens of thousands of people watched the launch. The launch was real, no doubt about that. The rocket worked, no doubt about that. Did it do what it was supposed to have done? Did it do what we are told it did? And this is the point I come in with a question. How do we know it did what we're told it did? Because NASA tells us that it did it. Oh, great. The people responsible for it are reporting on the success of it. Now, I don't happen to believe that NASA tells the truth at all times. As the New York Times dubbed them many years ago, never a straight answer. They tend to dissemble when things get a bit rough. Now, if there was a decision made at a very high level politically and at NASA that getting to the moon under the conditions that were known to exist on the moon, because they'd sent unmanned craft there, the Surveyor, the Ranger, the Surveyor and the Orbiter craft, they knew what the conditions were. Could they land humans live on television safely and return them safely back to Earth with no possible problem and no possible difficulty? Could NASA guarantee that?
You can't guarantee yourself going to work in the morning.
Exactly. So if they're going to do it live on television, it has to be seen to work. You don't want astronauts dying live on television. Forget that. That's not going to happen.
14 of them have died live on television.
There's a risk to space travel. Everybody knows that there's a risk. They knew there was a risk. In fact,
Yeah,
the Apollo
yes.
mission had some of the highest risk levels of any of the missions that we've ever done. If it's like down to like a 1% chance, they're not going to launch.
I am pretty sure the Soviets killed a lot of people that we don't know about.
Yeah, they did.
I actually don't know about that one, but I've done a little stuff into that, and I think all the people that was supposedly killed were accounted for. They were just unpersoned there in the USSR because they did bad things, like stay up after curfew, because that's how the USSR worked.
Who would have blown the whistle? So why didn't the Soviet Union come out and say, oh, America aren't doing what they say they're doing? Because they didn't do that, which implies that either they didn't know or they knew perfectly well what was happening and decided to keep quiet about it. Because how would it be to their benefit to embarrass America? It wouldn't, because in September 1968, the Soviet Union, which has one major export product called natural gas, had just signed a new contract to supply natural gas into Western Europe. Don't forget the Cold War was on, the Iron Curtain existed. Europe was divided between East and West Europe. So in September 1968, the contract was signed to supply West Europe with Russian natural gas. They weren't about to jeopardize something on which their national security and livelihood depended. If they thought that a few Americans were prancing around on the moon, but they weren't actually there, it was all done in a film studio somewhere, they weren't really interested. And anyway, the invitation to cooperate with the Soviet Union, between America and the Soviet Union, had been made in 1963 by John Kennedy. It wasn't taken up, there was no cooperation until the Apollo-Soyuz project in 1975. So why would the Soviet Union have done anything like that? It makes no sense. A much better question would be, why did no engineer, scientist, photographer, biologist, anthropologist, or any ologist you can think of, why did nobody in the West question it? And the answer is they did. There were a lot of people who questioned it. One of them who questioned it was Bill Clinton. He outlines it in his book, My Life. So there were people who questioned it. It's not as if this is a done deal. There are plenty of people who questioned it. There are plenty of people who challenged what had happened. And the other question normally asked, well, how could 400,000 people who worked on Apollo keep a secret? They didn't need to keep a secret. They didn't know anything about it. It wasn't part of their activity. They were doing the best job they could. They were going to see it live on television, the same as the rest of us did. So the Russians weren't going to blow the whistle because there was nothing to blow. There was no hoax to expose because they didn't know how they'd done it. The 400,000 people who worked on Apollo, which obviously included quite a few drivers, cafeteria staff, secretaries, and ancillary workers, who were just as important as the rocket scientists, of whom there were quite a few thousand, they were doing the best job they could. It's called compartmentalization. It's a military term because the US Air Force were running the Apollo program. They were brought in to get the thing back on track after Apollo 1. There was a lot of money. 25 billion is the figure normally quoted in 1970 dollars, which is equivalent to about 175 billion today. It's similar cost to what the space shuttlers and the ISS have cost. It's big money, but in terms of the US national budget, it's less than 0.5% even today. So, yes, with enough money, anything is possible.
I still kind of think that was a little bit addressed towards me a little bit when I keep saying it was impossible to have faked the footage. That doesn't have anything to do with money. It only has to do with lighting and the technology that was available back then and just the way that the inverse square law works. The ham radio operators, they only contact people when they're low Earth orbit. So it wouldn't be any ham radio operators. If you're talking about the third-party people, that would be the reflectors on the moon. Those can be done by private universities.
What? Don't get that.
The reflectors on the moon, they're done by universities.
Well, they were put there by Apollo, allegedly.
Well, yeah, but the laser that shot up and then measured when it comes back down.
Oh, yeah, okay. Just one point on that. Who were the first people to shoot a laser at the moon and get a reflection back?
Wasn't it Jojo Bank?
No, it was the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in 1963 when there were no reflectors on the moon. So they're reflecting the laser off the lunar surface.
It's not about getting reflection back. It's about the amount of reflection that gets back.
And that's important?
Yeah, if you just shoot it at a random place on the moon, you're going to get one base amount of light back in your reflector. If you shoot it at the reflectors that are sitting on the moon, you're going to get a completely different amount.
Right. What diameter is the laser when it reaches the moon?
Small enough that you can accurately shoot it.
Right, it's 2 kilometers in diameter.
Yeah.
That's tiny.
Yes, it's tiny. What size is the reflector?
Small.
Yeah, about less than half a square meter. They're quite small. So if you use the formula for the area of a circle, pi r squared, and the radius is 1 kilometer times pi, basically what I'm saying is that the area that the mirror covers in the laser diameter is so small as to be almost impossible to identify. What area is this reflection when it gets back to Earth?
You expect the reflection to be extremely small when it comes back to Earth.
Yes,
With the reflector, you expect it to be tiny.
yes, a few photons of light.
Yeah, if you shoot it anywhere else on the moon, you get even less.
Yeah. Now, the same experiment was done the following year in the Soviet Union, and they got the same result. In the 1940s, radar signals are being bounced off the moon. Radio signals are bounced off the moon. So it's a very secure form of communication. If you can pick up the returning signal, very few people have the equipment to listen into you.
No one's arguing that you get something back from the moon when you shoot a laser at it at a random spot. It's all about the difference between when you shoot it at the reflectors versus when you shoot it at another random spot. These are very sensitive sensors that pick this stuff up.
Yeah, they have to be.
If you're getting a different result only where the reflectors are, what does that tell you?
But how do you know where the reflectors are?
We know where the landing sites are. We have the coordinates for the landing sites.
If you examine that, you'll find that NASA provide you with 10 different coordinates for each landing site.
We talked about this last time, and we can only find 2 different ones. The 2 different ones were a completely different way of writing the coordinate system, and they both point to the same general area. And the general area is small enough that a 2-kilometer radius would easily encapsulate both of the reflectors that are down there.
Okay, all right, fair enough. I just don't think you need a reflector to get a decent signal back. Nice shiny rock.
Then why are the nice shiny rocks only in the places of the landing sites?
Because that's how they managed to light up all the astronauts climbing out of the shadow side of the lunar lander. The highly reflective lunar surface, we're told.
But that highly reflective lunar surface is the entire lunar surface. So if I shoot it at random point on lunar surface and I get result A, and then I shoot it at random point in the lunar surface, I still get result A, and then I shine it at the landing site, I get result B. Why is it I'm only getting result B on landing site while I'm getting result A everywhere else I randomly point it at on the moon?
Are you quoting the Mythbusters program?
No, I'm not.
Because they allegedly did this. I think it was the McDonald Observatory, and I wasn't totally convinced by the evidence they produced for that, but never mind.
I'm quoting other documentaries.
Fair enough.
The radiation was so weak to my knowledge that the amount of radiation passing through the shielding of aluminum foil in the rocket, it was negligible.
Now there speaks somebody with great confidence and understanding and knowledge of radiation in space. I wonder where he gets it from. Look, if I'm wrong about the radiation, I want to know. I haven't been persuaded yet that I am. So, if somebody can come up with the evidence to say radiation in space is really no more than a couple of chest x-rays, nothing to worry about, don't even bother to harden your satellites, don't even bother to protect the astronauts. Yeah, fair enough. But let's see the evidence that that is the answer. I'm yet to be persuaded that it is. There's the mystery of the Apollo command module found in the Atlantic Ocean the day after the Apollo 13 launch, which was April the 11th, 1970, was the official launch of Apollo 13. That happened. A lot of people watched it. Rocket goes up, disappears. Next day, the Soviet Navy, who were conducting exercise in the Bay of Biscay, came across an Apollo command module. I'm not saying the Apollo command module, an Apollo command module. There's no doubt about it. There are photographs of it. It says NASA on it. It was taken by the Soviet Navy to Murmansk, just east of Norway, the base for the Atlantic Fleet, who were doing the exercises, and it was handed over to the US Coast Guard cutter, the South Wind, on September the 6th, 1970. Brought back to the US, and it's now on display outside Grand Rapids Museum in Michigan. You can go and see it. What the hell was it doing in the Atlantic Ocean? Even if it wasn't Apollo 13, even if it wasn't, it's supposed to be what's called boilerplate 1227, BP 1227. Boilerplate was the practice command modules. They weren't full command modules, they didn't have all the kit on board, but they were used to practice for astronauts or getting out of them when they were dropped in the ocean and what would happen if things happened. So they didn't use a full command module, they used what's called a boilerplate, a mock-up version. But what the hell was it doing in the Bay of Biscay? Now, when the Apollo missions were launched, they would follow a similar trajectory and they would go out over Africa. And most astronauts would look out for what's called the Eye of Africa, which is a very visible physical feature in Mauritania called the Richat structure, R-I-C-H-A-T, Richat structure. It's 3 concentric circles about 20 kilometers in diameter. It's very visible. Astronauts would look out for it, so they knew, well, at least we got to Africa, guys. Let's go on. The Richat structure is in Mauritania, which is about 1,500 miles south of the Bay of Biscay. So either Apollo 13 malfunctioned, had to ditch in the Atlantic, which is where the rockets were sent anyway, or it was a boilerplate version of the Apollo command module, in which case there are question marks, serious question marks. Right, let's say it's a boilerplate. Let's say it was dropped off the side of a ship. Oh God, what's happened? Oh, we dropped it over, it's drifted away. Oh, well, somebody will see it. If it was dropped off the coast of Florida, because they didn't practice anything in the Bay of Biscay, it's 2,000 miles from Florida to the Bay of Biscay, which is off the coast of France and Spain. How long would it take to drift there? About 5 or 6 weeks. There would be some evidence of marine life on it. Barnacles, seaweed, algae, all the stuff that you get if you leave a boat in the sea for too long. None of that appeared. There were no barnacles, there were nothing. It's as if it had just come down. It hadn't drifted across. It was never reported missing. So there's a real mystery. This thing was real. There are photographs of it on the USS Coast Guard cutter South Wind. What the hell was it doing there? Nobody's ever come up with a decent answer to it yet. And the coincidence mounts up when you realize it was picked up 24 hours after the official launch.
The boilerplate that was found, was it not being used by the UK, by England, when it was lost?
The UK didn't use Apollo boilerplates. The only US publication that reported the recovery of this capsule was the Stars and Stripes, the US military publication, in 1970. It wasn't widely reported. So obviously, losing a boilerplate, losing any capsule, losing anything is a bit of a downer for NASA. They weren't about to publicize it, and they didn't. So if you've managed to lose one of your practice command modules, let's just say it's there. Let's not worry about the official Apollo 13. Let's just say it was a boilerplate. You think they would have reported it missing. You think they would have been a little bit embarrassed that the Soviet Navy found it, took it back to Russia, and handed it over 6 months later, having had a good hard look at what was inside. But the one that is now on display at Grand Rapids Museum in Michigan has been sealed till 2076, the 300th anniversary of the creation of the United States. He's referring to the N-1 rocket, which was the Soviet version of a Saturn V. They had 30 engines, and they had 4 test flights, all of them failed. It's very ironic that SpaceX's new super-duper rocket has got 30 engines. I hope it hasn't the same effect.
Marcus, do you want any kind of last words here? Give yourself 2 minutes.
Yes, anybody who would like to contact me, you can do it either through the aulis.com website, that's AULIS.com, or nexusmagazine.com. I'm the UK publisher of Nexus Magazine, the world's leading alternative news magazine, which is essential reading for anybody trying to navigate their way through these contentious times. It's a fascinating subject, the whole space travel. I'm absolutely fascinated by it, as I think both of you are. And I do appreciate that we have different approaches to it, different views, but eventually somebody will return to the lunar surface. President Trump has said that must happen, basically before the end of his second term. If it doesn't happen, he's going to get particularly upset and start calling NASA out. He said, well, if it's so easy for you to do 50 years ago, what's the problem today, guys? Get on with it. Is likely to be his response. It's interesting that the head of human space travel, I think at NASA, forgotten his name, resigned last week. He seemed to have got involved in a bit of skullduggery somewhere. I don't know what happened, but he resigned. Second one to resign in a year. Very unfortunate to lose people like that. I hope they do get back to the moon. I really do hope, because then we can have a look at the Apollo landing sites and confirm that they're real. It hasn't happened yet. Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter photographs do not persuade me that those are photographs of what we're told they are. They're very good photoshopped images.
I will say I am equally excited to see a new person stand directly beside the Apollo landing sites. I think that would be amazing.
Don't forget, they can't get closer than 2 kilometers. There's an exclusion zone around them. So they're going to have to get a telephoto lens to get the landers in the same picture.
Still be good enough for me. Blue, any last words, brother?
I think this is actually a better discussion than we had last time, and I can't wait to have a third. I guess, thanks, Marcus, for being here. Again, I think we both brought up some cool subjects. If you want to find me, my YouTube channel is Blue Earth Thing. We're currently building an observatory called Happy Deer Observatory, and you can follow the progress of that on my YouTube channel. And it should be one of the largest observatories in the state of Alabama when it's finished.
Will you be able to see the landing sites from him?
No, we won't have a telescope that powerful, no.
Even the Hubble isn't powerful enough.
Yeah, it's crazy when you deal with that telescopes. Like more money you put, the better it can get.
Yeah. And thanks, Kevin, for controlling everything so well.
Oh, you're very welcome.
A round of applause for Kevin.
Have a good night, everybody.